All right, everyone, welcome back to the Psych and Theo podcast. The topic that is so culturally relevant, alphas versus betas. And Tim and I have discussed this extensively. It's been a topic of conversation for many men, and even women have jumped into the conversation as well. But Tim, why do we want to talk about this alpha versus beta dynamic?
Well, I think, the impetus for this was the cultural conversation we were seeing, especially, that earlier episode we did with Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson. That's where a lot of this came about. So that's where this conversation started, was we started honing in on the tendency among men to say that they want to be an alpha male, that every man wants to be an alpha male, and no one wants to be a beta male. And so there's this binary choice. You either choose to be an alpha or you remain a beta the rest of your life. You're forever cursed to be a beta. Alpha being assertive, dominant, in charge, all that, and beta being submissive, subordinate, subject to the whims of the tough life that you live, whatever. So all these men, are being told, you got to be an alpha. The reason you're unhappy, the reason your life sucks right now, the reason you're not getting what you want is because you haven't channeled your inner alpha, and you got to become an alpha male. And hardly any of them stop to think, can we all be alphas? If the alpha is in charge, can we actually all be alphas? Just getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I think this paradigm suffers from what's called the fallacy of composition, where you can't really apply something to everyone. It's like, can we all have $1 trillion without the effects of inflation? No, we can't. If you pump that much money into the economy, the dollar is going to get inflated into infinity. Okay. So like that, we can't all be in charge. You can't all be alphas under this paradigm. If the alpha is the one that's in charge, imagine a world where every man saw himself as an alpha and started acting as an alpha, as we will describe it. It'd be a terrible world to live in.
It would be. Yeah, it definitely would be.
Yeah. So that's why other men have to define themselves as alpha, and everyone else is a beta. No, it's the other guys that are betas. I'm
right.
Alpha. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we got to dispel this myth. Where did this come from? Is it a myth that Christian men should accept for themselves? Is it a paradigm through which Christian men should see themselves and other men? That's the question I think that we need to answer.
Yeah, definitely. So I think as we jump into this conversation, we'll define a couple of our terms. We'll kind of explain a little bit about what the alpha versus beta is. And then hopefully we'll start getting into some pros and cons of both. And there's also descriptions of many others, as Tim has discovered that there is a range, apparently. So it keeps on growing. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you will leave with some clarity on what the actual goal of engaging in this conversation is. So as we start our conversation, and most of you guys may know already what we refer to when we say alpha and beta, but some may not, right? So alpha, just think of someone who is assertive, confident, and dominant in social situations, right? They just want to come off as the leader of the pack. They want to be the most loud voice in the room, but that doesn't always get expressed in the same way, right? It could also be an attitude that a person has towards life. So we'll talk about the alpha here. The beta male is often more described as more passive, collaborative, empathetic in interpersonal interactions and so on. But this carries with it a negative connotation, kind of like that they're weak and that they don't have any real opinions about things, when they may just leave space for others to give their thoughts and opinions. So those are the two extremes that we're kind of talking about. And, we spoke about the Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, and we kind of had that same type of conversation, both maybe being considered alphas, just in a different way, because their personalities are completely different. Their experiences are very different. Their values are very different. So now we're going to jump into this aspect of not alpha versus alpha, but maybe alpha versus beta, and then any of the other categories that we've been seeing. But yeah, Tim, anything you want to add to those definitions or the other categories?
No, well, I'll add one thing. These other personalities that have come about because some men have been dissatisfied with the binary choice of alpha or beta, and so there's been other personality traits that have been, let's say, identified in this debate. So let me read some of these for you. So, of course, you have alpha males, and I'll just define this. This is from the Good Men Project. They define alpha males as the personality type that's strong, determined, confident, clear about their goals. They're characterized by a sense of leadership, a strong sense of self, charismatic, attractive. Think the total package. Beta males are typically friendly, respectful, have incredible social skills. They're approachable. People gravitate toward them, especially like women in terms of like friendships and things like that. They love being around others and they seek appreciation and approval. But they're kind of maligned sometimes for being submissive and subservient and subordinate to alpha males. And so the beta under this paradigm is almost intrinsically inferior. Mm. Then there's some others, gamma males. Now, folks, this is not our view. We're describing what men are talking about in the culture. So we're going to analyze these later, or at least take them apart. But here's the third one, gamma. Gamma males are described as interesting and adventurous. They seek joy and fulfillment in life through new experiences. They love traveling to exotic places, exploring various lifestyles, and avoiding monotonous routines. So think of them as the adventurous, kind of artistic type person, just kind of freewheeling, spontaneous guy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then there's the omega males. Omegas are highly self-aware, confident individuals who don't feel the need to seek power or win popularity contests. However, they're driven and motivated from within by focusing on their personal goals. They're intellectually inclined, and they might fit the description of a nerd or a geek archetype. So they're sort of the intellectual kind of nerds. So they can be assertive when it comes to mental, psychological, intellectual subjects, but physically they're not dominant, and they wouldn't be socially dominant either. So yeah, that's the omega. Deltas, a delta male demonstrates more reserved characteristics, realistic perspective on life. Think of the man who kind of blends in, just kind of rides in the middle a lot. He kind of wears basic t-shirts, doesn't seek to stand out. It's I kind of, I was reading the Delta, I'm like, that seems like me. So they focus on essential things in life, like respect, relationships, competence, normalcy. So they don't seek to rock the boat either as an alpha when they don't want to be a beta or anything like that. So that's the Delta. Two more, Sigma male. Sigmas are they're described as cunning and clever personalities. They're not afraid to challenge the system. I love these platitudes that these websites give to these personalities.
Right.
The Sigma is the lone wolf guy, sets his own rules, kind of goes about his own way. Kind of like you described, I think you said John Wick. John Wick would be a personality type that. Or Fonzie from Happy Days, although Fonzie's more extroverted. So something like that. He exists outside of the system. And then the last one is called Zeta males. And Zeta males create their own rules, don't conform. So it's similar to the Sigma. They don't conform to social standards. They're considered a mix of Alpha and Sigma. I don't know. I don't see what the difference would be with Zeta, where they stand out. I'm just looking at this description. I don't see them. They're saying the Zeta is there. So I don't know. Right. There's no science to this, I think is what we're getting at. Yeah. So, okay. So those are all the personality types that people have identified among men. And I think the tendency is for men to say, oh, I'm one of those. They want to gravitate latch onto one of those and say, which one am I? I'm this one.
Yeah. What's the men's Enneagram? I mean, remember Enneagram? Everyone wanted to be, a number 3 or number 7 or whatever the case is. And I'm just like, just be who you are. You don't need to. I think we were talking earlier about boxing yourself into a specific category, but like anything with personalities, with these different types of males, I mean, there's pros and cons, right? There's pros and cons to both, pros and cons to personalities. It's just finding kind of where you fit. And I guess, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add to that. I was going to get into the pros and cons of being the alpha male or beta males.
Well, but before we do that, I think we need to explain to the audience where this paradigm actually comes from, where it started. And so, just very, very, very brief history. The idea of alpha males and beta males in relationships was first discovered by an Alaskan zoologist, or a zoologist who was up in Alaska observing the relationships of wolves, pack animals. And he noticed that there was one wolf who was in charge, leading the pack, and the other wolves took orders from him. And so he named that the alpha male. And then the others were described as beta males in that sense. Along the way, that study was supplemented by some other studies. And I think there was ultimately problems with that study. I couldn't recall exactly what those problems were. I remember we're learning about this a long time ago, but essentially, the main problem that we have now is that this flawed study of wolves in Alaska got extrapolated out into human relationships. And this is what happens so often with nature-related things. People do this all the time. And you see this with evolutionary biologists and evolutionary psychologists, especially. You being a mental health professional, you probably had to study some evolutionary psychology, but I see this all the time in the field of evolutionary psychology when I'm dealing with apologetic issues. Evolutionary psychologists will try to explain human relationships and human behaviors by animal relationships and animal behaviors, because after all, we came from them, right? We evolved from them. And so what happened with this wolf study is that it got extrapolated out into human relationships where, someone concluded, human beings act this way too. There were some later studies of chimpanzees and monkeys, a lot of studies on them because they're our closest relatives, in the evolutionary chain, and observing how they act. And in chimp tribes, there's usually a dominant male who gets to mate with all the females, and all the other males are subservient to him. And so if they want to mate, they have to basically beat him. And so evolutionary biologists and Jordan Peterson even is guilty of doing this too, of extrapolating animal behavior and relationships into making that normative for what normative means, applicable and something that's a moral duty for humans to do. It's normative, it's a norm, a moral norm for humans to do. So he's been guilty of this. They make animal behaviors normative for human beings, basically saying in nature we see this behavior, and so we extrapolate or we infer from this is how nature is to this is how nature ought to be, or the nature of human beings. So animals act this way, therefore humans ought to act this way. And we can imagine all kinds of problems with that. I mean, animals are predatory. Let's start with that. We have human beings who are predatory, but we don't condone it, do we? We see animals devouring each other all the time, mercilessly, but we don't condone that as a human being. We see all kinds of mating rituals and animal kingdoms and phyla that we don't apply to ourselves. I mean, animals don't ask for permission when they want to mate.
Right.
Now, sometimes the male, you see this in birds, canines, chimps, any of them. There are these mating rituals where a female will have to give permission for the mating to occur, but that's not always the case. But we don't. Sometimes a male species of an animal kingdom will force himself onto a female. We don't accuse them of rape like we do humans. So there's this big problem just in the literature, in this whole study of human relationships, where people will try to take lessons from the animal kingdom as though they're applicable necessarily to humans. That's a big flaw
That's a bit a lot of the alphas emphasize a lot too. It's like, well, this is just how it is in the animal life, so it makes sense that we're going to be like this too. And they emphasize those things, realizing the moral wrongdoing with it.
Yeah, the mistake in their thinking is they just want to see the similarities between humans and animals.
Right.
It's like, oh, how are we similar? Well, before you conclude that human beings, that a behavior is okay for human beings to do because the animals are doing it, first ask, how are human beings different than the animals? Are they essentially different? And in the Christian worldview, we would say, yeah, human beings are essentially different than animals. We're not just a higher form of evolved species. We are a spiritual, rational being. And our spirit allows us, it gives us a moral character, like the rational agency by which we make decisions about the world comes with a moral character. And that moral character helps us to judge our thoughts and our actions. We have a conscience by which we judge our thoughts and our actions. Yeah. Animals don't have that. So that's a big difference between us. And now the evolutionary biologists will try to argue that our conscience comes from some survivalist instinct. And we have answers for that in the Christian apologetics world. So to boil it down, morality, what I'm really getting at is that in a lot of this thinking, what's beneath the surface with a lot of men, and they may not realize this, is the ideology beneath the surface of this alpha beta debate is an ideology that we are just like animals. And that our sense of morality is simply a higher evolved form of survival instinct. And that is not true. But a lot of men don't realize that is the paradigm that's lurking beneath the surface of this debate about whether you're an alpha or beta or gamma and all these other things.
So they really comes out to breaking down. It comes out to breaking down their worldview or their premise of that we come from animals, because if they believe that, then obviously it seems difficult to try to convince them otherwise, because they're going to think that they have animal instincts and can't control them, but they should just follow their instincts and drives, right? Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so I just went off on a soapbox. Where do you want to go from that?
No, that's good. You know, one thing that came to mind was, it's interesting though, because one of the studies that was done to see what reinforces certain types of behavior or what continues certain types of behavior. And it's whatever gets rewarded. Whatever type of behavior gets rewarded, that is what the person is going to be more likely to do. So for example, if you as a male are in a work setting, right, and you're typically more quiet and more reserved and maybe more relational and so on, it will take you longer to maybe move up the ranks if you don't become assertive. And why is that? Well, because the people who are vocalizing their interests and vocalizing what their goals are, they are essentially being rewarded for giving themselves a voice, right? They're putting themselves out there. They're saying, hey, I want a raise. Hey, I want this new position, whatever the case is. So that gets rewarded. Now, if you were to be in that same setting, and let's say anyone who took that approach, that would get punished, right? For you in that sense, it's going to be a good thing that you're maybe quiet and just waiting your turn or your time to move up the ranks, right? So it's whatever setting that you're in, most people are looking at, well, what's being rewarded? If being an alpha is not being rewarded, then I'm not going to take on the characteristics of being assertive and dominant and pushy, right? So I think in a big part of this conversation is when you look at your surroundings, we call this an attachment. It's not just the way that you relate, but there's another piece of it, which is adaptation. How do you adapt to the people around you? And this works in relationships. This is in work settings. This is in church settings even, right? What works? That's typically how we try to operate. What's working for me? So if you're acting in beta form or have some sort of beta characteristics and that's working for you, then you're going to continue those same behaviors. If it's not working for you, it's going to push you in a direction where, well, you know what? Maybe I should try to be more assertive because, I'm just getting walked all over here, or, I've been waiting for a raise for the last, 3, 4, 5 years and nothing's happened. So I think I need to learn how to be more assertive. So you try to be assertive. And then if that attempt or if that behavior gets punished, you'll stop doing that and you'll go back to being a beta by the description that we're giving. Now, if you're an alpha and you are dominant and you are assertive and so on, but it's not working for you in your workspace or in your relationships, then you're going to stop that behavior if you want a relationship, right? You can't be treating people, just telling them what to do and expect that you're going to have a relationship when you do that. So it needs to be strong enough to move you into a different direction. So we will continue doing behaviors that get rewarded. So for example, some of the pros of being an alpha male is that sometimes they can be very inspiring because of their leadership qualities, right? They just kind of take things as they are. They want to move forward. They want to take action and deal with the consequences later. That can inspire other people. That can be good. Confidence and assertiveness, right? If someone feels confident, that can make me feel confident about where we're going to, or make others feel confident about where they're going. And social dominance, kind of this aspect of who are they influencing? Who do they have influence over, right? And if they have strong influence with different types of people, we can see that as a pro because it can help us reach our goals. So it needs a certain type of personality. It needs a certain type of approach, right? You can learn these different ways of approaching situations. But it comes naturally for others, right? Some people are just naturally more dominant. So behavior-wise, maybe their dad is military, so they learn those types of behaviors as well, and they take that dominance into their relationships. Again, if it works, they're going to keep doing it. If it doesn't work, they'll stop, right? But here's some cons of the alpha male, and we kind of talked about this with one of our guests earlier, Tim. But there's a tendency for the alpha to be aggressive and arrogant, and people don't like that, right? So some people will perceive that confidence as arrogant and aggressive, and others will see it as, oh, that's confidence. So it really comes down to who they have around them that's going to interpret that type of behavior. But a con for those who are alpha, they tend to be aggressive and arrogant, and that's just not appealing in certain settings and situations. They have difficulty prioritizing cooperation. So they want to do things their way. They don't want to really hear anyone else out. They think that their way is the only way, and they'll try to impose that on others. That's not a good thing. And it poses strain on relationships, right? In relationship, you're both giving 100%. And typically from what we've seen, Tim, with these alpha males, it's like, I receive everything. I'm going to give you just a little bit or just enough because I need to reserve my resources for all these other things that I'm doing in my life. So that's not conducive to a healthy relationship, right? Romantic or friendships, right? When you're just thinking about yourself and carrying out your desires and your wants and your needs, it won't help any type of relationship, right? So those are the pros and cons of the alpha male. The beta male the pros are they emphasize a lot of collaboration, right? When you're working on teams, you want to be able to get along with people and want to help people come together so that everyone feels heard, everyone feels understood, and everyone feels like they have a voice in, whatever the project is. In a relationship, same thing, right? Your view is not the only view. You got to take in your partner's view as well. Right? They have a good capacity for empathy, like feeling pain that other people feel, at least trying to understand. And they're flexible, right? They can go along with wherever, whatever's happening at the time. They don't have to have a strict schedule. They can kind of adapt to the situation. They realize things come up and, okay, yeah, let's do that. Right? So those are some pros that help a lot in the relational space. The cons, as we kind of alluded to earlier, is there is this tendency to be overlooked because they don't really assert or explain or elaborate on their thoughts and feelings, in the relationships or at work or whatever the case is. So because they don't say much or cause much distraction, they're just overlooked, right? It's just that person that does not really notice one way or the other. They may have trouble setting boundaries, right? So they may just say yes to everything. So they're always burned out, always looking for, oh man, I can never get some rest. And, they just have a very difficult time setting boundaries because they want to be there for everyone else. Again, it can be good, but in that case where it hurts them, it's a negative thing. And lastly, a con is they can be overshadowed often by those more dominant personalities. So they might have really good ideas But if you don't sell your point or sell your idea, the person who is more vocal and outgoing and assertive, their idea might be heard more than yours. So for those uh, who are talking, or as we're talking about these two different types, it's looking at those pros and cons and just understanding, okay, what do I need for this specific situation, right? Forgetting about the data, about the beta and the alphas, just think about for this specific situation, relationship, work space, church involvement, like what do I need? What's needed here? And then just asking God for wisdom to know, okay, how can I approach this situation that's causing me some distress, right? Because if you're trying to be an alpha and you're not getting anywhere because you're, getting everyone mad because of how you're approaching relationships with them, then obviously you're going to have to stop that behavior. If you're more quiet and reserved and aren't asking for a raise, but you want a raise, then you're going to have to learn how to be more assertive. And we do in counseling, we do assertiveness techniques and how to explain your needs and set your boundaries and so on. So it's just, what do I need and how can I learn it, essentially?
All right, so that's a lot. Let's unpack some of this.
Yeah.
So let's back the truck up a bit and go back to this pragmatic concept that you talked about. Mm-hmm. People will respond to incentives, and men will respond to incentives. So you said in counseling, you ask people what's working. What's working for you. Something's not working for you. You have to adapt. You have to. So if you're not assertive enough and you want to get a raise, or you want to get a promotion, or something, you have to learn to be more assertive because you're getting passed over. Mm-hmm. Or if you're being too assertive and you're wrecking relationships, trying to be too dominant, too domineering, well, that's not working for you. You need to find something else. Mm-hmm. I think in our culture, there's a lot of men who are being incentivized in the wrong ways.
Oh yeah.
That I think gives this myth power. The myth of the alpha beta. I think it gets power from bad incentives in our culture. We've talked about we did an episode on the red pill community and how feminists, like one of the problems in our culture is that hyper feminism that flips a lot of natural incentives on its head. Like a man wants to be a provider for his home. He wants a stable family. He wants a peaceful home. And he doesn't want to be cuckolded by the state. He doesn't want to be have his life ruined by the financial incentives of the family court. I'm just kind of saying all the things that the red pill community have brought up. Mm-hmm. So there's this negative incentive to avoid marriage now because of these situations in our culture. So the incentive now is for men to just seek out sexual gratification and sexual encounters without marriage, without any commitment. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that in a culture like this? Well, you have a culture of women now who, now of course it's not all women, but like there's a growing proportion of women who are also being sexually promiscuous in their 20s and into their early 30s. So you have a situation where people are not getting married; they're having sex with each other. Like it's just rampant. And then you have to throw in the LGBT issue as well. The incentives to have a stable family are really, really like bad right now. So a man, like so in that space where men feel like they can't get a woman because like the incels and the big towels, like women. I think we talked about in the feminism episode, like this problem of hypergamy, where women now, because of the dating apps, they're disproportionately hooking up with these hyper, like the 9s and 10s, so to speak, of men, these hyper narcissistic men who are sleeping around with all the women. So all the women are kind of gravitating toward that. They're all fighting over this like top, quote unquote, top tier man. And all these other men are without any sort of hope for a mate or a wife or whatever. So Now, what's their incentive? Now, if they want to have a family, if they want to have a successful partner or a romantic partner in their life, what's the incentive? Well, the incentive is to act like the narcissistic Uber man.
If that's what they want is to be sleeping around with all those women, have the same type of lifestyle, then they will have to take on those characteristics, right?
Well, because they're told the reason you're single or the reason you're lonely is because you're being too beta, and so you need to act more alpha in order to get a woman in your life, and so you need to embody the traits of what it means to be an alpha. And unfortunately, the culture is telling you that, they're telling them that the alpha is all of these different really bad traits that are short-term thinking to the max.
Right. No, and here's the interesting thing too, Tim, is that it's funny because those alphas, they can get all of these different women and they have fun with it for whatever number of, whatever season, but they can't hold long-term relationships because again, that alpha personality or that alpha approach, it doesn't work for long-term relationships. So for the beta, it's like, okay, if you have those strong capacity for empathy and connection, then maybe you just need to learn a little assertiveness and not go to that extreme of being beta alpha, right? So for them, it's interesting because their strength is the weakness of the alpha, right? So they can maintain healthy relationships, but to get there, their journey is a lot longer because they're waiting for, the right person, or they want it to be a long-lasting relationship. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's one of the realities where they have to just learn how to be maybe more, I don't know if I want to say assertive, but I don't know, taking their shot, I guess, is the best way that I can say it. Is just, okay, take your shot. That's what I would say to encourage them if they feel that way, because they have the qualities and characteristics to hold a relationship. But, it's encouraging in them and that goes back to our point is what's being rewarded. So if we're trying to help one or the other, what's being rewarded is, can you be a little bit more assertive? Can you explain your needs? Do you understand how you feel? Can you communicate that well? And so on. So yeah, it's just very interesting for me to see how much being an alpha is rewarded, but in the long term, it's actually really bad for you, for your relationships, if that's what you're looking for, right? And I think we talked about that on the Tate and Peterson episode where we said men are being drawn to Tate because that's what they want. So if they want that, you're going to have to act like Tate. If you want what Peterson has, you're going to have to take on characteristics that he's developed as well, right? So it's just such an interesting topic. I'm just glad we're talking about it because hopefully we're debunking this myth as we wanted to,
Well, so to push back a little bit, I don't think men should think of themselves as alphas or betas.
Right. And we talked about,
I think that these categories are not helpful at all.
No.
Maybe some will say maybe that's the Sigma in me or something. But I just, in our interviews, we're going to talk to some people and we'll talk about what does alpha mean to you. So I think in our interviews, we're going to sort of reorient the meaning of alpha to something more biblical. But the categories as they are right now, I think are really stupid. Like, I think they're really dumb. And I think that men who fall into this trap, they're doing themselves a big disservice by just not thinking critically about what the culture's telling you. I'm not calling those men dumb, not saying that at all. But the things that come to us from the culture sometimes are just really dumb. And we just, you can just dispatch with them with 5 minutes of critical thinking. And I think this is one of those things where you see all kinds of just garbage online of like, this is what you need to do to be an alpha male. And it's like, I don't need any of that stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. What you get at, like what you're getting at is when we identify problems in our lives or deficiencies, then we can identify, well, what's working, what's not working for us. Like, here's a goal, here's something we want. And then what we've been trying hasn't worked. So we got to try something else. Exactly. And maybe that's a shift in our personality. Maybe it's a shift in our habits. Maybe it's a shift in our spending or our prayer life, spiritual disciplines. It could be anything, a shift in something.
Mhm.
I think a lot of men think, oh, well, yeah, I could see some men saying this right now, like, oh, I'm an alpha. I just need to be a little bit more gentle of an alpha. It's like, stop saying this. Just let go, let go of the category. Let go of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully we're communicating that you just let go of that category because it's not going to be helpful. I think it's just like the personality types, right? Whether it's the, Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or the ocean personalities, whatever the case is, like you're not constrained to that. Like you can grow, you can learn, you can continue to, seek out knowledge and yeah, just grow as a person, grow in your faith. And I think if you look at it more from a growth mindset, right, that ability that with time you continue to grow and you can learn new things, that's going to work much better for you than you thinking that you're just an alpha or a beta, right? Or a sigma or the, what's the other one? What's
Omegas,
Omegas, there you go.
Yeah.
Omega. I was thinking fish. I'm like, what's the fish?
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on there, Tim. Don't, if you're listening, those of you guys who are listening, don't categorize yourself as any of these. Like it's not going to be helpful for you, right? Because the culture's talking about it, we decided to have this conversation about it, but hopefully we're helping you understand that labeling yourself as one or the other or wanting to be, the alpha, like that's not going to be good for you. It's better to just kind of develop, as we were talking about as Christians, we want to develop the fruits of the Spirit. And that changes your mind, that changes your heart, that changes your approach and how you relate to people. And, so those are just some things like, I think we were briefly touching on, Tim, on were there Bible characters who kind of displayed either these alpha or betas in their personalities. And the people I think about is Peter and John, right? I think most people can make that argument. Oh yeah, this, Peter was more alpha. And so we try to Christianize, maybe is the word, or spiritualize these things. And we say, well, Peter was more of an alpha and, John was more of a beta or whatever the case is. Like, don't do that.
Well, and you're hitting on the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Would any of you, I'm asking any man who's listening to this, who's a Christian who has enough sense about him, if you were face to face with the Apostle John, would you call him a beta male?
Right.
Like the answer is obviously no, you would not. The man was boiled alive by the Romans for not recanting his faith in Jesus. Like as tradition goes, he was boiled alive. He survived it, and then he was exiled to Patmos. So he spent a lot of years of his life on a prisoner island. Like, would you call him a beta male because he was kind and gentle? Like, no.
Right.
Let's not forget he was called he was one of the sons of thunder when he was younger because he had anger problems. And he learns to be the apostle of love, which is where we get his letters. So you're right. Like if a very simple reading of the Bible, they say, oh yeah, Peter's the alpha male, like John or someone else like are betas. Like, would you really say that to someone? Like, would you call Mark, like the helper of Paul and Barnabas, would you call him a beta because he didn't he wrote one of the Gospels? He wrote probably the earliest gospel. Yeah.
So good. Yeah.
So that's why we need to just dispel with this paradigm of alpha and beta, because it's not helpful at all. Like, don't even try to read them into the Bible, because they're just not helpful. Like, you mentioned the fruit of the Spirit. Sorry, I'm going off on this one, but
no, it's okay.
You mentioned the fruit of the Spirit. Like, just think of all the different personalities throughout the Bible. Like, even just the chapter in Hebrews, the chapter, the Hall of Faith, as it's called, and all the different characters that are mentioned there, and their different personalities and life circumstances and the things that they endured and went through. They weren't alpha males.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two of them you could say, oh yeah, that's an alpha male. But a lot of them were regular, ordinary people. They were scared. Like, they had fear. They weren't successful or had prestige, as the world would call it. Hebrews says even that the world was not worthy of these people. The world thought they were worthless, but the world was not worthy of them. So you can't even slap this paradigm of alpha and beta onto characters in the Bible, because the Bible flips all of it on its head anyways.
Yeah.
Jeremiah was the weeping prophet. Isaiah, according to tradition, was sawn in two. David is the archetypical, alpha male king. But, look at Hezekiah or Josiah, other kings that were born into it. Look at Samuel. Like, Samuel was a prophet, and he had some pretty alpha moments, but there were times where he was pretty gentle. I could go on, with this, but it's just such a simplistic paradigm that doesn't help to see how the Bible actually defines people. And I think this is what our first interview with Dr. Wu came about. I think I like what he said, what he tries to instill in his kids, and I think this is right, that the archetype we should be pursuing, obviously, is Christ, but I think you could sum that up as character and courage. Character being holiness or righteousness, and then the courage, moral courage to face the world and to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
And you can do that. You can have moral courage no matter what your personality is.
Yeah.
No matter what your physicality is. You can choose, you can have the right character if you submit to God and follow him, and then you can have moral courage to do the right thing, even when it's hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tim, and as you were talking, we've been talking to the men about these different types, but the other part of it too is the conversation is also on the other end too with the women, right? If they're choosing or wanting alpha-like characteristics or beta-like characteristics, whatever the case is. Also, so for those women who are listening as well, is that in a lot of ways, this also speaks to you guys, like, okay, what are you looking for when you're thinking about these different things? Because this conversation is in those same circles, right? Yeah. So yeah, we also want to, caution, but also just remind you that these categories that you hear about in culture are not helpful. So if in your mind, you've kind of developed this archetype of, I want him to have all of these, alpha-like characteristics, then you're going to have to deal with the other side of it, which I talked about the cons of that as well, right? And again, same thing, if you look for these other more gentle characteristics, again, that also comes with its own cons. Well, again, what we're trying to help you guys see is, how are the fruits of the Spirit growing in this person? How are they becoming more like Christ? That becomes more apparent to you than these other things that the culture is so heavily pushing upon men and women, and saying, this is what you should want, right? So hopefully we've debunked that idea.
I think it's sufficiently debunked.
Yeah, I agree.
I would. So I just as a recommendation as we close, I would recommend people, you mentioned the fruit of the Spirit. I would recommend reading through Galatians 5, 16 through 26, which is where the fruit of the Spirit is listed. And ask yourself, how many of those line up with what the culture says a man should be? So you have a list there of what we are supposed to be as people who walk in the Spirit. And then ask yourself, how many of those traits, meekness, gentleness, kindness, all those things, how many of those embody the quote unquote alpha male in our culture? That's my challenge to our audience.
I like it, man. That's good. Great conversation. Love this. Love that we're talking about this. I hope you guys enjoy this series, as we are going to be interviewing some really key people, and we're calling it, I don't know if you ever mentioned it, Tim, but Gentle, Dangerous Men. So look forward to that series. Help us out by submitting topics. Again, there's a little link right when you look for our podcast on Apple Podcasts that could say, send us questions or comments. Send it there. We'll take that in. We really try to listen to what you guys are saying, what you guys want us to talk about. And, we prepare for it. And again, just leave us a rating and review. That's going to help the podcast as well. But thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.